And so, Simon, before we get into kind of, questions surrounding the Civil War, the lack of reporting, why are we only hearing about it 2 years after it started? Can you tell us just what the hell is going on with this Sudanese Civil War?
So we have to go back to 2019, and what we're seeing now is the result of a split between two factions that united to oust Omar al-Bashir, who was the Sudanese dictator. And we know Omar al-Bashir because he's one of our pets. You know, South Africa, we've got warlords that we like and warlords that we don't. And the warlords that we like, we bring them out to Sant and Son, and we're told to arrest them, but then they flee. And the warlords that we don't like, that's when we dust out our aging senior council, give them an oil change, and then send them to The Hague. So Bashir is in control at a point where these forces have gathered to oust him, and the two forces are namely the RSF, which stands for Rapid Support Force, and that's led by a dude called Hamidi. And then there is the Sudanese Armed Forces, which is led by a dude called Abdel al-Burnham. And there are very distinct characters, these two. Al-Burnham is very much a military profile, in as much as you can be from the Sudan, and Hameti is a former goat herd. And what happened in 2019 was a promise to form a democratic transition, which ultimately failed, leading al-Burhan to become the de facto leader, at which point Hamedi decided that he didn't want to play second fiddle. And so we're at this point, and I think it's, before you ask me, Gabriel, about the origins, including Darfur, it's important to note what happened last week. And that was I remember very vividly that The Hague spent 5 years and tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds, working out what Ratko Mladic and Radovan Karadzic had done in Srebrenica, which was the site of a mass grave and a genocide, 8,000 Muslims in 1995. Now, last week, we saw this harrowing footage of a dozen or so Sudanese Africans seated in front of RSF officials, commanders, at which point the dude started knocking them off. And there was a guy in the back digging a hole, and for $250,000, I can go to The Hague and show them that video in 20 seconds, and we should clear that out. But as a point of discussion, the silence from the crowd, who are very into war crimes, is absolutely deafening.
Yeah, before we get into the kind of silence there, let's maybe stay a little bit further. You've painted this picture, but people in South Africa, I don't think kind of necessarily understand what it is that's driving the aggression in Sudan. So we've got these two rival warlords who are now the kind of focal point of the civil war. But how do we get to this point where we have these two warlords?
So there's a very long way to answer that in looking at the country's post-colonial history, which has just been one massive orgy of dictator after dictator. But I think it's important to go back to the early 2000s in a region to the west of the country that people should be familiar with, known as Darfur. And in Darfur, you have a number of Sudanese who are non-Arab. Those are the same guys who got machine gunned last week. And in 2003, these dudes started kicking off because they were being marginalized. So Bashir, who was dictator at the time, al-Bashir, he sent out some forces to quash these protests, but he discovered that there was a militia roaming around, made up of nomad Arabs, and these guys were called the Janjaweed. And among the Janjaweed, he discovered a guy called Muhammad Hamdan Dagalo Musa, and that is Hemeti's full name. And in this guy, he saw the most ruthless operator who just went in and killed thousands of people and was a really, really brutal official. So he brought him into his circle, and for his services, not only in Darfur, but in the protection of Omar al-Bashir, he gave him access and control of these lucrative gold mines to the west of the country, just adjacent to the Darfur region. But things started going badly for Omar al-Bashir around 2011, because as we all remember, that's when South Sudan declared independence. And I must say, Thabo Mbeki is never credited enough for his role in forming that. I used to share an office in Marylebone with the South Sudanese embassy here. And those guys really, really liked him for what he did there. But from 2011, because the oil reserves in Sudan are located in the south, and al-Bashir has no longer access to them because it's a sovereign nation, the economy starts spluttering in Sudan. Now, he's making money at the same time from sending his fighters to places like Libya and Yemen, but it's just not enough. And come 2018, and he has a problem. He's got domestic protests, uprisings, and it's at that point that Hemeti and al-Burnham pull off this very surprising move, and as opposed to protecting him, they arrest him. And as I said just now, the next thing that happened was a promise of a democratic transition. The guy that they put into that role resigned, leaving al-Burnham to take things into his own hands, at which point Hemeti, who's making enormous amounts of money from his gold mines, goes, no, I want it all. And there's also a proxy arrangement going on here, because the UAE has been the subject of a very, very ambiguous genocidal inquiry at The Hague for funding the RSF with weapons. But al-Burhan's Sudanese armed forces are allegedly in receipt of weaponry from both Russia and Iran, and both leaders have met Vladimir Putin, and obviously the Wagner Group has been active in Sudan. To what extent it's not exactly clear, but they've been there. So this is a real mess, and I think that it's important to Frantz Fanon's book, The Wretched of the Earth. Sudanese are really the wretched. If you look at what happened last week and the manner in which these people were ended, it's absolutely astonishing. And I think that, that it does prompt a very important question about our attention and how much emphasis we are placing on blatant war crimes, blatant conventions, blatant infractions of the Geneva Convention.